Well, hello there from the great state of North Carolina, the state that produced Andy Griffith, the state that produces great basketball, particularly NC State, where I graduated in 1982. Of course, there's a couple other basketball teams by the name of Duke and Carolina that are here as well too. We in North Carolina are also known as God's country as well too. But just want to say greetings to you from the great state of North Carolina. By now you probably know me, Sobriety. Today we're in track 2 or part 2 in Sobriety. My name is Jeff Cloud, for those that don't know me. Phone number 704-499-1332. With Crossroads Reentry Ministries, we exist for no other reason than to help people leave behind the incarceration lifestyle, addiction, alcoholism, some of the other things that are peripheral to that. And of course, that's our entire purpose, is to help people leave behind that incarceration lifestyle. We start working with people on the inside of prisons and jails. We help them also when they get out. We help with any God-honored need other than the big L, which we call legal, because we're not lawyers. But other than that, any God-honored need people have as they're getting out of or already out of jails and prisons to make it on the outside so they don't have to come back. That's what we're about. Our mailing address, Post Office Box 861, Huntersville, North Carolina, 28070. Again, Post Office Box 861, Huntersville, North Carolina, 28070. Huntersville, for those of you around the nation that may not know, is near Charlotte, North Carolina. And Charlotte is basically about the central location of both Carolinas, North and South Carolina. It is the Carolinas' biggest city, and basically Huntersville is a little suburb of Charlotte. So I do a lot of work in the Charlotte area, working with people getting out of jail or prison, have for 2 decades now. I'm celebrating 20 years of trying to help people coming out of jail or prison leave that lifestyle behind. But again, call us when you get out. Half the calls that come in, and last year I got several hundred calls from people out of jail or prison. Half of them that came in, those calls that came in, Mr. Cloud, I need a job. Big need for people not to go back to jail or prison. We plug them in with a way to get a job that works for people with records. And it works well. Second biggest number of calls that I got was from people needing a safe, sober place to stay, about a third. Mr. Cloud, I don't have anywhere good to stay. I just got a call from a man yesterday who was dealing with that same issue. The place he was at, people were using. Mr. Cloud, I need to get out of here. This is not a good environment for me. And so I helped him, and in the process of helping him get into a place that is a safe, sober place to stay. So 1/2 the calls jobs, 1/3 of the calls safe, sober places to stay, and the last 6th, if you do the math, the last 6th, 1/6, is what I call miscellaneous. And that'd be, Mr. Cloud, I need to know where NA meetings are. I live in such and such. Mr. Cloud, I need transportation so I can go look for my work. Mr. Cloud, I just got out of jail and all I got is paper clothes that they give me because I had shorts back in September, first week. When I got arrested, I've been in a fight, it had blood on it, they considered it hazardous waste, can't store it in the jail. I get out, all they got to give me is paper clothes. Can you help me? I got nowhere to go, nobody to connect with. So I think that kind of paints the picture of how we can help at Crossroads. So give us a call, 704-499-1332. If you're inside prisons, jails, about the only major thing we can work on before you get out is a place to stay. If you don't have a good, safe, sober place to stay when you get out, it might be wise to write Crossroads at Post Office Box 861, Huntersville, North Carolina, 28078, about 5 months if you can before you get out. And I believe we can get you some information where you could start the process of trying to get you a place before you get out, no matter where you are in the nation, and typically it takes a couple months to get the applications, fill them out, maybe get approved, send them out to several places, and then you got a place to stay a month or two before you get out. That's why you need about 5-month mark to start sending it to us. Don't send it to us before when you got 2 years out. Nobody's going to hold a bed for you for 2 years. But about 5 months before you get out, be a great time to write Crossroads Reentry Ministries. Okay, and I introduced myself the last DVD Part 1. But what we're going to talk about today is DVD 2 of the Sobriety track. DVD 2 of the Sobriety track. There's 8 total tracks of sobriety. Jeff Cloud has been through a 12-step program, still goes to one, been sober over 20 years. Prior to that, alcoholic, over 20 years. Drug use was a secondary thing to me, to my alcoholism. Couple dozen arrests. Back in the day, prior to 20 years ago, I get sober roughly 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, 0 arrests today. That's how important it is to stay out of jail or prison and arrest, to stay sober. It's going to be hand in hand to make it happen. Hand in hand to make it happen. So what I'm going to do today is pick up on some more basics of sobriety, if you will. That's what I did in DVD 1. Today we're going to look at the big book. What is it? How did it come together? The 12 steps. What are they? How do they come together? We're going to look at what is a sponsor. We're going to look at the importance of getting through the first 5 steps and why the vast majority of substance abuse programs nationwide focus on that, typically. We're going to talk about getting phone numbers in the rooms and call them. As noticed, I put that like North Carolina would say it. Call them. Call them. C-A-L-L-E-M. Of course, we're saying call them, but call them. That's how we say it. Get the phone numbers in the rooms, call them. All right? We're also going to talk about 90 and 90. 90 meetings in 90 days. 90 meetings in 90 days. All right. First, I want to talk about the big book and the 12 steps. What is the big book? The big book is the basic text for Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous was the first 12-step recovery program. The big book is the basic text. And what it does in there, it tells us how to go through the steps. It shares with us stories that may be similar to others of us who've suffered from alcoholism. Now, what's interesting is the 12 steps, basically, of Alcoholics Anonymous were taken, and Narcotics Anonymous used them, Overeaters Anonymous used them. A thing called, it's Christian in origin, Celebrate Recovery uses them. But the 12 steps are foundational. And of course, they come from Alcoholics Anonymous, and the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is where they can be discovered and understood in their original context and understood in thoroughness. Now, how did they come together, the big book? How did it come together? Back in 1935, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob both got sober. Before that, Bill Wilson had been sober. Dr. Bob is the first one he works with to get sober, and Dr. Bob's sobriety date was June the 10th, 1935. Since that became 2 people being sober instead of 1 person being sober, and it being a group, it needed at least 2 people, they count that as the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous. So 1935, June the 10th, you have Dr. Bob getting sober, and you have Bill Wilson, sober as well. The founding, birth, start of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, prior to 1935, here's basically what had been going on in the United States of America with alcoholism. An alcoholic was pretty well doomed to death. Not that there wasn't extremely rare exceptions to that, where somebody would have a spiritual rebirth and not have to drink again, but it was very, 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 very rare. So Alcoholics Anonymous came along, and basically Bill Wilson's philosophy in Alcoholics Anonymous was, don't preach to people who are alcoholics, tell them you need to do this and you need to do that. They've heard enough of that. His philosophy was this: this is how I got sober, and I will share what worked for me. If you want to try it, I believe it'll work for you. And that's basically the philosophy of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says in the preambles of Alcoholics Anonymous, we share our experience, strength, and hope with one another. We don't tell others what to do. So I think you can kind of get the picture there. Well, in 1935, you're getting the first people sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. 1936, 37, it's starting to move into the hundreds, maybe even thousands of people getting sober, primarily in the Ohio and New York area. They had two major places going on, New York City. They also had some, I believe, Akron, Ohio it was. And basically what was happening was word was hitting the nation through newspapers that there is this group called Alcoholics Anonymous having tremendous success with people getting and staying sober. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is so that if you understand how it came together, most people, when they understand how this program of Alcoholics Anonymous came together and how powerful it was then, and it's even today, millions of people getting sober today, this year, 2014, as I filmed this DVD, that people are more willing to embrace Alcoholics Anonymous and thus sobriety, or a 12-step program, Narcotics Anonymous, for example, and sobriety. Stay sober, stay out of jail. We talked about that last DVD. Stay sober, stay out of jail. So the big book was sitting there and had not been written yet, but newspapers around the United States of America, and for those of us today that might be young, we might not even really realize how important newspapers were, but in 1930s, late, they were the primary form of communication. People would read that newspaper. They'd read it all the time, see what was going on in the United States, see what was going on in the world, so they'd be kept abreast. Now, newspapers were very instrumental. They caught wind of this new program, Alcoholics Anonymous, helping people get and stay sober. And when they did, they started putting articles in the paper. And the articles might be in Los Angeles, California, or Boise, Idaho. They could be anywhere in the United States in the local newspaper. And what was happening was people around this nation had been struggling with alcoholism, and here's the kind of things they had been doing in the past to try to treat it. They would put their head in electrodes, those silver things with all the wires hanging on them, and try shock therapy. Many of them would be in institutions in straitjackets because they were out of control and they couldn't control their drinking. It was a rough scenario for an alcoholic, just to say the least. So here was alcoholics around the nation realizing as they read those papers, hey man, I got a problem with alcohol. I can't beat it. And there's people, New York, Ohio, beating it. I got to have this. How do I get it? And of course, what they would do is they'd see in that newspaper, Bill W. and Dr. Bob S. Leaders in Alcoholics Anonymous, because they didn't put their last name in there because they knew to keep it anonymous, else people get their prideful egos up. Look at Bill Smith. He got sober. He knows how to get sober. And ego would end up crashing them down back into relapse. So they realized that the level of press, radio, and films keep things anonymous, and that's what they did. So here you have Bill W. in the paper and Dr. Bob S. helping people get and stay sober through Alcoholics Anonymous. People who were reading this would write that paper. For example, they would write the major paper or papers in New York City. Please send this letter or get this letter to Bill W. or Dr. Bob, whatever the case may be. So they started getting hundreds of letters in. At first they were getting dozens in, they would write them back. But after they started getting hundreds, they could not write everybody back. They realized there was a ton of alcoholics around the nation drowning in this disease called alcoholism. So what did they do? They realized, we'll get together and we will write the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now you catch a key word there. We will get together. Not I, Bill Wilson, not I, Dr. Bob, not just us two and write the book because we're way more powerful than everybody else. It was we will write a book of Alcoholics Anonymous to help people get and stay sober. And what they basically did was in 1939, they took probably the first 200 people who had been sober 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. Remember, it started in 1935. 1939, they got people 1, 2, 3, 4 years sober. They all come together for the purpose of writing the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what they did basically was this. They had an old school blackboard with old school chalk, meaning that old school blackboards were black. The chalk was white. They got into a room somewhere, a classroom or whatever, they got those 100 into the room. They basically said, hey guys, let's do this. Today we're going to start really hammering on the steps that we took to get and that keep us sober. And so they would pray on it, meditate on it, think on it, whatever the case may be. The moderator would get back up and he would be basically starting. When he started things though, he'd say like this. I want you to think about, meditate on, pray on for 30 minutes or so steps that you took that you think are common to all of us in this room and that somebody did out there would help them get and stay sober. And then one guy sits there and when the moderator comes back, he says, anybody got anything? One guy raises his hand. I had to admit I was powerless, and I believe we all had to admit we were powerless over this thing called alcohol, and that our lives had been unmanageable or a mess. The moderator looked around the room. Anybody else? Basically every hand in the room went up. Puts on the blackboard. Somebody's jotting down the notes. They end up organizing the steps. Then they expand on the steps. They move from the steps and do such things as fifth step promises. In other words, what comes true when somebody does the fifth step. So this original group of about 100 people getting and staying sober wrote a book so that now somebody in Boise, Idaho didn't have to write Bill W. and say, Bill W., write me a letter, tell me how to get sober. Basically what was going on was now we can get them the book. So the man in Boise, Idaho, he can take the book, he can get sober, and then we're going to encourage him to start up an AA group and to start trying to help people get and stay sober in Boise, Idaho. And that's how you see it began. And of course what ended up happening, it went worldwide. It went worldwide. Today, the last I remember, it seems like there's at least tens of thousands of groups of Alcoholics Anonymous in the world, and there's at least 2 or 3 million or multi-million people that are going to AA worldwide. I do believe that the statistics I hear is that each year about a couple million people come into sobriety through Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's probably just in the world in general, but there's probably more than that. That's just kind of what they did a rough study of. And the one thing about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a program of honesty. So they're not going to inflate their numbers. If anything, they're going to keep them low so that somebody could go and say, yeah, I see they got at least that many people getting and staying sober. So of course an anonymous program, it basically means that a person doesn't have to let others know who they are or that they're going to the meeting because of the stigma of alcoholism. But the big book and the 12 steps, that's how they came into being, and there's very much power in that. Now if we think about it, not only were they saying what worked for them back in 1935, part of the guidelines, 35 to 39, part of the guidelines was, what do you think would work for people down the line who will follow us, they'll come and get sober, and those steps would work for them. The 12 steps, for example, step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves would restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. What you start seeing is this sequence of steps. And then in the big book, they give you a way to get into them a little bit deeper. For example, a 4th step and a 5th step, those together are called the inventory steps, major inventory, where we look at our life. We deal with fears. We deal with resentments or grudges. We deal with sexual relationships. We deal with our deep, dark secrets, because all of those things can cause us to go back to our drug of choice, whether it be alcohol or drugs. And as we look at those 2 steps, there is about 20 pages or so that kind of give us guidance of what to do on those 2 steps, because they're very detailed and they take a lot of work. And of course, with the stuff in black and white, it helps us tremendously to go through those. Now, later in the DVD series here I'm doing on sobriety, we will talk about a 4th step, and we will talk about a 5th step. Matter of fact, one DVD is going to be devoted to each of those. One DVD for 4th step, one DVD for 5th step. But the big book and the 12 steps, they came into being. Now the steps, also, many of them in the big book have associated promises. Associated promises. So it basically becomes like this. If we do step X, whatever X may be, 5th step, 9th step, there's a couple of key steps in there that the big book shares with us promises, about 10 or 12 in each case, that come true in our lives if we do the steps. I'll just give you one quick glimpse of that. 5th step, one of the promises says we can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Boom. That's a physical meaning, and it's also a spiritual meaning. The physical meaning, before I did a 5th step, I get home, I had to crank on the music or the TV, the radio, whatever the case it may be. I had to have noise. Looking back upon it, here's what I realized. I didn't want to deal with those demonic voices that might say, you're the lowest piece of crap because you've done blah, blah, blah. Whatever my deep, dark secret is, fill in the blank. But after doing the 5th step, I had told my deep, dark secret, and the demonic, satanic enemy, whatever you want to call him, could no longer beat me down with that stuff anymore. I didn't have to have noise. I can come into a house, not have to cut a noise on. Why? I can start hearing from God in my spirit without all the world's noise. In the spiritual, I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. What does that mean? I'm not always going to feel God's presence. I don't trust my feelings. I trust God's word. That's two different things. I can feel this and be wrong. But God's word's never wrong. Now, my point being to that is, that's how those promises come true. And in my life, as well as I believe all who have thoroughly and honestly gone through these steps, all those promises come true. But that's how the big book was put together. That's how the 12 steps were put together. And of course, their associated promises are kind of like the carrot dangling out in front of us. In other words, we need to be moving towards something, but we also need to know what is the benefit of that. In other words, if we're moving towards something that doesn't benefit us or anybody else, ain't no need to do it. But in this case, it benefits us by staying sober, and that's going to benefit a ton of people out there. Our children, our wives, society, whatever the case may be, by us staying sober. We're going to walk in a more blessed life. So those promises are very, very important. If we'll get in there and kind of explore them, they do come true in our life when we do work those particular steps. So I think this hopefully has painted a picture of how the big book and the 12 steps came into being and what they are. Basically just a guide of how to get and stay sober and change a life that will be a life that is blessed. Change a life into a life that will be blessed instead of the way it was formerly in our disease of alcoholism and drug addiction, cursed. Okay, that's a big picture overview of the big book and the 12 steps. So next, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about a sponsor. A sponsor. If you've ever been involved in a 12-step program, you've heard that word. If I go to a 12-step meeting, whether it be AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, whatever the case may be, I'm going to hear generally multiple times, probably 5 or more during a meeting, some fashion, shape, or form, get a sponsor. That is a major tool in getting and staying sober. The way to think about a sponsor is this. I'm going to use the fishing guide illustration. Those of you that have seen A Job and D Job by Crossroads, the DVD series on getting an A Job, and then what is D Job? There was 5 DVDs in that one, and you've seen that. You realize there's a story that I tell in there about a fishing guide. Now, the fishing guide that I'm talking about here is I currently have not fished, but maybe very, very little, if any, our major lake. It's only about 3 miles as the crow flies from where I'm at right now, Lake Norman, just north of Charlotte. I believe it to be North Carolina's largest lake, man-made lake. And there's a lot of people that come there to fish. Now, if I wanted to go fish there, there's 2 ways I could go fish. One, I can go by myself per se, try to catch fish. I've never fished much. I can tell you this, I might catch something. I might have the wrong lures out there. I may be catching the wrong fish, catching some sort of carp or gar, and I really only prefer eating bass or brim. It could look squirrely, to say the least. But if you imagine there's a second way that I could go out there and fish, and it would be this. Go hire the best fishing guide on Lake Norman. Now what's going to happen if I do that? We're going to get out there at first and he's going to say, Jeff Cloud, today's a 75-degree day. We're starting out here at 10 o'clock in the morning. Temperature will get up about 87 today. We got plenty of light. Here's usually where the bass are hitting in those places. And we need to fish near this brush in about 8-10 foot of water. We want to fish about 3 or 4 foot deep, whatever the case may be. Why? He's got a ton of experience that works catching fish. I got little or no fish. I would be very wise to partner up with him so that I could get into this fish catching thing. Now, it's similar in Alcoholics Anonymous. The big difference is this. When I pay a fishing guide, I had to give money, of course. And many of them might charge 40 bucks an hour around here, 50 bucks an hour, whatever the case may be. That would be big money. The difference in Alcoholics Anonymous, the sponsor cost me nothing. In AA, NA, 12-step recovery programs, we do service work. Those of us who have been there and gotten sober are compelled to give away sobriety, because that's an insurance card that keeps us sober. So in AA, your sponsor doesn't cost you anything money-wise at all. But what is the sponsor? He's been there and done it. He knows how to work these steps. He can give us his valuable experience on how he did this step. Here's how I did the 4th step. My sponsor told me blah, 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 and I did dot, 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 dot. And he lays out the game plan. Just like that fishing guide sits there and says, Cloud, we're going to fish 8 foot deep, 10 foot deep. We're going to be 3 foot, the water 8 or 10 foot deep. We're going to fish about 3 or 4 foot down. We're going to fish about 8 feet, 10 feet away from the brush, whatever the case is. He's been there and done it. He knows what works. So a wise person partners with somebody who's already been there and done it, so we don't have to bang our head against the wall. And that's basically what a sponsor is. Now, I want to share with you real quickly what I call God's seesaw in life. God's seesaw in life works like this. If we are prideful, there will be a major fall in life, or a fall in life, depending on how prideful we are. If we are humble, God will lift us up. So if you catch that, pride on the seesaw goes down. Humility goes up. That's God's seesaw. Now what is pride and what is humility? Pride basically sticks a hand in God's face and says with its actions, doesn't matter whether it says it with its words or not, stay out of my business, I'll run the show. Pride also says, hey you people, everybody, stay out of my business, I run the show. Guaranteed in my life and every human life I've seen, when pride is exercised, there is a fall. Jeff Cloud, I ain't gonna listen to nothing God says. Becomes a practicing alcoholic womanizer for 20-something years. Ages 11 to 33. Wow. Fall to a rock bottom of pain, excruciating in the spiritual, emotional, mental, and even physical. Bam! Big fall. Humility says, God, I got to have your help. You run the show. And by the way, I also need your help as it comes through people. Give you an example on that. Crossroads, Jeff Cloud could sit here with pride. I'm the man. Nobody can teach as good as I can. Therefore, I don't need to get anybody else in Crossroads because they can't teach as good as I can. It would never get any bigger than Jeff Cloud. It would never get any bigger than Jeff Cloud. What did Jeff Cloud do? He said, God, if you want to grow Crossroads Reentry Ministries, you grow it, you got to send the people. He sent me multiple teachers so far, many volunteers, etc., so on and so forth, that have come along with this organization. And last year we helped about 2,000 inside of jails and prisons, several hundred of those when they came out to leave behind the incarceration lifestyle. And this year, as we're doing our DVDs, we believe we're getting ready to start going regional and nationwide. This thing's going to start hitting tens of thousands of people. Now, I had to have all kinds of help to understand this is what you need to do when you film it. The church people let me borrow their classroom. One of my teachers, very good with videos, he even loaned me a tripod there that's being used to film this thing and gave me some pointers. He put together a 3-minute clip that'll go to programmers, case managers, authorities in jails and say, here's a little picture, 3-minute snippet of what we got to order. But if you catch that, what's happening is I'm not sitting here going, I'm the man, I know it all. Don't tell me what to do, God. Don't mess with me, people. Blah, blah, blah. That's pride. We'd be slammed down as an organization. Humility says, God, you got to help me, and you got to help me through the people you're going to send to be a part of this thing, whatever part they play. God's lifting Crossroads Reentry Ministries up. How does it look in alcoholism or drug addiction? Hey, God, I'll run the show. Screw what anybody else says. I'm the man. I run the show. Pew, crash. Cursed life. Humility. God, I got to have your help, and I got to have your help as it comes through people. And let me embrace that. We see that life start rising, becoming more and more and more of a blessed life. More and more and more of a blessed life. So, when one humbles himself or herself and gets a sponsor, God lifts them up. What's a great way of getting a sponsor? If we listen to the preambles, what's read at the first part of AA meetings, at least here in the Carolinas, or NA meetings or whatever the case is, we'll hear things like this. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. So if we want to get a sponsor, we don't get somebody who's sitting in an AA or NA meeting, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to do that. Why? He's trying to govern. He's trying to control people's lives. Don't get him as no sponsor. What do? We look around. There's a guy over there who's, now remember, our leaders are but trusted servants. They don't govern. They are but trusted servants. Here's a leader, one who is sponsoring people. That's a leader. He's serving. One who's always there to help people before and after the meetings. He may stay an hour after the meetings. He's not rushing into the meeting at 8 o'clock and leaving at 9 o'clock just there for the 1 hour meeting. That's not a leader. He's not serving others. So you be careful who you look around. Here's another great way to do it. Ask what appear to be the leaders the first month or so, give it about a month, that you're in the rooms of recovery, AA or NA, whatever it may be, and give it a month or so, but go around, watch a couple weeks, maybe even get a temporary sponsor. Actually, somebody you're going to call and say, hey man, I'm sober today, or I'm craving alcohol, and he'll give you some pointers, that kind of stuff. But you're looking for the major permanent sponsor. That's going to be the one that carries you through the steps. You're basically asking the leaders in Alcoholics Anonymous, who would make a good sponsor for me? Now here's generally how it's going to work. If you ask 10 people that whom you've observed what appear to be good leaders to you in AA or NA, the enemy's going to have about 5 names. He's going to try to create chaos. So he's going to give you 5 different names. Bill, Bob, Sam, Fred, and Ronnie. All right? 5 different names. God's going to give you 5 other names, and they're going to be the same one. Jeff C., Jeff C., Jeff C., Jeff C., Jeff C. 5 out of 10, Jeff C., Jeff Cloud. That means God's wanting you to get Jeff Cloud as your sponsor. Now, that's how we get a sponsor. Sometimes we may not like what we hear them say, but we got to remember early in sobriety, we were very spiritually sick. Now, as we get and stay sober, we will get much more spiritually healthy. I didn't say spiritually perfect, but as the years roll on and we walk with God, we become way more spiritually healthy. And that transfers into mental health and emotional health and physical health as well too. So far today, we've looked at the big book and the 12 steps. We've looked at sponsor. Thirdly, what I'd like to look at is this: the importance of getting through the first 5 steps. The importance of getting through the first 5 steps. I'm sure everybody watching this video has heard of a treatment program. There's a gazillion of them in the United States of America. And here's basically how they work. Most of them, people come into a treatment program and they want to try to get them through the first 5 steps of a 12-step recovery program. That's number one thing that they do. Number 2 major thing that they'll do, when that 28-day treatment program ends, they'll point them to AA and or NA kind of thing. You'll need to be going to your meetings. Okay, that's 2 major things they do. They do other things as well too. They give information and teaching on substance abuse and what drugs do to the body and alcohol does to the body, etc., so on and so forth. There's a lot of work doing inventory, stuff like that. But 2 major things they're going to try to do, in general, I know there are exceptions, but the vast majority of substance abuse programs nationwide try to get somebody through the first 5 steps, number 1. And number 2, what they try to do in the substance abuse programs pointing to AA or NA. Now, I want to camp out on that first part, the importance of getting through the first 5 steps. Why do they do that? Here is the biggest reason why. You remember me talking earlier in this DVD about promises that come true for people who work specific steps? It points to the 5th step. In the 5th step, we see a list of about 10 or 12 promises. It's on page 75 of the big book, if you happen to have a big book. That's 75 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you look at the promises there, it will say something like this. It says, the feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. Now, if you break that sentence down, what you realize, it's very confusing. And I understand why. If I'm the enemy, I want to confuse that sentence big time so people don't get it. They don't understand that promise. But here's what that promise basically means. The cravings end or the jonesing stops. The cravings end or the jonesing stops. Now think about it. Us who are alcoholics or addicts or cross-addicted, if we can get beyond the craving and it stops, and we can get beyond the jonesing and it stops, we can make it. We can make it. Our cravings, our jonesing has carried us back to our disease of alcoholism or drug addiction a gazillion times. So it's a huge promise. And what substance abuse programs from the past realized, we got about 28 days to work with somebody. That's a good, comfortable time to kind of get their head clear, get them through the first 5 steps, and then we know that the cravings and the jonesing have stopped. They'll have a good chance to make it out there beyond the walls of our substance abuse 28-day program, whatever it may be. Whatever it may be. So the importance of getting through the first 5 steps. Again, the jonesing stops, the cravings end. And for an alcoholic or an addict, if we can get to there, that all stops. What else goes on when we get through the first 5 steps? We see how valuable these steps are, and we want the rest of the steps. We see how much of a benefit they give us. How much of a benefit they give us. So it makes a person, I've never worked with a person who did an honest, thorough, got through the first 5 steps, and then said, well, screw it, I don't want to go any further. Everybody I've ever worked with who's done that, and I've sponsored hundreds, by the way. I've sponsored hundreds. The vast majority of them, just coming from a Salvation Army or whatever, they needed a sponsor, had to get a name on paper. But many dozens I've worked with who have gotten, stayed sober, probably hundreds have gotten and stayed sober. But the point being that they realized that once they got through that 5th step, hey, give me the rest of what this has got to offer. This is good stuff. And that's why it's so important to get through those first 5 steps to kind of get everything nailed down. Now, we've looked at the importance of getting through the first 5 steps. I want to talk a little bit about get phone numbers and call them. Get phone numbers and call them. That's in the rooms of recovery, whether it be Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Celebrate Recovery, whatever they are. Here's why. We are social creatures. We are social creatures, all right? When we're out there drinking and drugging, we had our little group we run with. Back when I was drinking, it was the river gang. We used to go down to the river, get drunk as skunks, blah, blah, blah. Saturday night, all through the night. Sometimes people get drunk, fall in fire. You know the picture of what the drunks will do down at the river, all right? Now, but there was a social group, if you catch that. When we get sober, those same drinkers ain't wanting to be in our game, staying sober. What are we going to have to do? We're going to have to find people who are sober and let them become our gang or our group we hang with. And part of what goes on is we get phone numbers in the rooms and call them. The rooms of AA, NA, or Celebrate Recovery, or whatever 12-step program it might be. We get phone numbers and we call them. Hey man, like what you share in the meeting, you seem to have good sobriety. Can I get your phone number in case I need to call you? What can happen is this. We're 2 weeks sober. We're basically craving. Let's make it crack in a 12-step program. We're craving crack. We're 2 weeks sober. We call those phone numbers. And a man who is a recovered crack addict says, here's what I did when I was early in sobriety to get over my cravings for crack. I threw myself harder into service work. What does that mean? I go to the meetings an hour before, help set up the coffee, all other stuff that they got, the cake, the cookies, whatever it might be, and I hung out an hour after, helped clean up the meeting. And what was going on? I was hanging around with the people who were serious about sobriety, number one. Number two, that took my cravings away. And that might be one way that worked for him, and he may share 2 or 3 others. For example, an alcoholic early in recovery will find that sugars, candies, Jolly Ranchers, sweet tarts, you get the picture, sugar daddies, whatever the case may be, eating a lot of those knocks the cravings down in half. Here's why. The body's been bombed with all that sugar from alcohol, so when we stop drinking, we got a sugar withdrawal, if you will. But if we bomb our bodies with sugar, cuts that craving down in half. Second thing is, the enemy wants me not to talk about my craving. You look like you're not good in sobriety. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Everybody craves a lot early in sobriety. When we sit there and make that call, hey, John, man, I'm craving right now. What happens as soon as we say that, that craving is cut in half. I don't know how that works. I just know it does work. Why? Because we gotten out there. What happens a lot of times, though, I don't let anybody know that because I don't look like I got good sobriety. And then what happens is the enemy's beating them down with the craving and it doesn't go away. But that's part of that humility versus pride seesaw, which I called God's seesaw a while ago. Humility says I got to reach out to somebody, and God honors that. He lifts us up. So he cuts down the craving. All right? He cuts down the craving. We get those phone numbers and we reach out and call people. And it might work like this. I may find some people in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, whatever the case may be, and we're 20-something years old, we're early in sobriety, and there's a group of us that like to shoot basketball. And I find that out. And I start calling around. We get a basketball game up on Saturday night. We're going to have it after the meeting down at school such and such, blah, 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 blah. They've got the gym open. They got it till 1 a.m. We go to our AA meeting or NA meeting, we got a group. We go down there, we shoot basketball sober. Something to do. Gives us good structured time. We don't get in trouble. We don't get drunk. We don't get high. We don't go back to jail. Amazing what goes on when we get the phone numbers and call them. But the big thing that we're going to be calling about is, of course, developing friendships, but more importantly, people that have been there and done it. We may call a guy when we're 2 weeks sober, he's been a month sober. Here's what I'm experiencing. The month guy says, yeah, that's what I was experiencing. I started working these steps and that went away, or whatever the case may be. So you see how one can help another. And when we first come in, we need to help. And that's okay. God realizes that. When we've been there a long time, years, gone through the steps, blah, 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 we start giving help. We start sharing our experience, strength, and hope. And that's the way things work. But the main thing is get phone numbers in those rooms and call them. Call them. All right. The last thing that I'd like to talk with you about in our 5 minutes or so we got left of this DVD for today is 90 in 90. What is that, Mr. Cloud? 90 in 90. Those of you that have been in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous will recognize that quickly. What there is a saying that basically goes like this. You won't find it in the big book, but where it came from was the experience of a gazillion people who got and stayed sober. And what they realized was they went to a bunch of meetings early in recovery. Basically, one per day. Now, I went to over 90 meetings my first 90 days of sobriety. Second 90 days of sobriety, I still went over 90. Third, maybe about 90. Fourth, fewer than 90. But second year, I'm going to 5 meetings a week. Fifth year, 2 meetings a week. I'm 20 years sober now, I go to about 1 meeting a week. Now, important when I first came in, 90 meetings in 90 days, and I see it all the time. Here's why. We don't even realize we've been bombing our mind with the world's message that getting high, getting drunk is a good thing. We bomb it by listening to music, could be rap, could be rock and roll. I grew up with rock and roll. Here was the basic message of rock and roll. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And when they say sex, they weren't saying sex the way God says have it, only in marriage. They were saying sex outside of marriage. They weren't saying drugs like if you got a headache, take a Bayer aspirin. They were saying, get high on them drugs. And oh, by the way, play our rock and roll music again. Why? Because you're going to be bombing your head with that message. Your eyes, your ears, etc. with your messages going into your brain. Why? Controlling the brain controls the person. Controlling the thought life controls the person. The enemy knows that very well. God knows that very well. Now, what happens is we get a choice. What messages are we going to allow into, I call them these gates. Our eyes and our ears. Those are our gates. Our eyes and our ears. What do we look at? What do we listen to? Our life is a city. If we open our gates to the enemy, he's going to tear our city up. He's going to loot it, he's going to burn it, he's going to tear it to the ground. If we open our eyes and our ears, which are our gates, only to our friend God, our city ain't going to burn to the ground by the enemy. And that is key. So what happens in 90 and 90 is we've been out there in the world bombing our mind with all that world's message that alcohol and drugs is a good thing. It ain't. It's a curse. It leads to a curse. There's no doubt about it. It might seem good at first, might feel good at first, but it's a curse. Now, the second thing that goes on is basically this. When we come into recovery, we start bombing our minds with how to get and stay sober, how to have a relationship with God, how the successful people that are doing that, staying sober, and have a good quality of life, have a good relationship with God, how do they do it? Now we're starting to hear them instead of maybe the rap song or the rock and roll song that's trying to tell us the world's way, which is really just going to do 3 things to us. It's going to lead to jails, institutions, death. It's going to do 3 things to us: kill, steal, and destroy. But we start listening in these 90 meetings. The old timers used to say, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. And what they were basically saying was this: you've been talking about how you're the man all the time. Look where your life's gotten you. It's a mess. So let's take that. We haven't been listening to nobody. Let's take that cotton out of our ears where we ain't been listening to nobody. Let's put it in our mouth and let's start listening. What happens is when we go into rooms, 90 meetings in 90 days, our lives will radically change for the better. We will really be going for that relationship with God and allowing Him to do things in our life that only He can. It's been my experience, people who do 90 meetings in 90 days generally make it in sobriety. The old timers say it this way: meeting makers make it. Meeting makers make it. Meeting makers make it. So there we have it. We've looked at the big book, 12 steps. We've looked at sponsor. We've looked at the importance of getting through the first 5 steps. We've talked about get phone numbers in the rooms and call them. and we've looked at 90 meetings in 90 days. Well, that's it today for Sobriety Part II. I look forward to seeing you in Sobriety Part III. And as I like to say, closing these DVDs, we've been blessed. Let's go be a blessing.